Welcome to the podcast. I'm your host, Keith Robinson, managing partner here at Focus Consulting Group. And today I'm delighted to have two of my partners, Brian Kozlowski and Liz Severns, with us to talk about measuring your culture. This is episode 3 of the Investment Leaders Guidebook. And we're going to spend a little bit of time just talking about what are ways that you can measure your culture. But it's really bigger than that. So Brian, I'd like to start with you as our strategy and rewards practice leader. You've worked at a lot of different consulting firms over your career. What differentiates Focus Consulting Group's approach to measurement versus other firms that you've worked with?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everybody. Data, and more data. And what really is interesting when we look at our organizational health survey is the way we're able to analyze the organization and gather data across multiple strings and really get to understand the underpinnings and the foundation of what makes the engine work at each firm, whether it be the extrinsic elements of its rewards plan, whether it be core elements of its culture, and certainly better understanding about its strategy, the importance of how all three of those elements work together to really provide folks a positive opportunity at their firm.
So Brian, in that vein, data, what was one thing that you've discovered about measuring firm effectiveness that maybe you hadn't considered before?
Yeah, I've looked, strategy is probably the thread I'll pull on the most here, because I think folks look at strategy in isolation. And for a lot of folks, strategy is product driven or market driven. And it's not holistic of, we need to provide a North Star, a direction for the organization, because folks want to know where we're going. Keith, you use this expression all the time, and I love it, is you don't want to be in the trunk of a car and not so you know you're going somewhere, but you don't know where you're going. And without providing that guidance to strategy, it's hard for folks to really feel tight with the culture. They need to know where the firm is going, and more importantly, how the role they play in getting there. And as we've seen in a number of the organizational health surveys that we do, where cultures start to fray, at least one spot, is when folks don't understand where the firm is headed. And sometimes that's lack of strategy. So that's one bucket. Sometimes it's lack of transparency. There's a strategy, but there's lack of transparency. And the third bucket, sometimes it's just lack of communication. And what's the difference between transparency and communication? Transparency is it just hasn't been shared. Communication is it has been shared. It just hasn't been shared in a way where folks understand it. And a strategy is great, but you need your folks to understand the direction that you're going. So that's been one of the pieces, and the real importance of strategy and how folks understand the importance of the role they play in their overall experience at the firm.
So part of what we're doing here is we're measuring the effectiveness of the firm overall. Culture and strategy fit together to support the firm's mission, to drive the vision. But you talk about communication. What are a couple things that you've seen as best practices that drive the firm's overall success, maybe related to communication or something else?
Yeah, so there are a couple of things that come to mind. First of which is it's getting voices in the room. So when you create a strategy, including more thoughts, because what you get is you get an opportunity to see different viewpoints. So how does that tie back to communication? If I feel as if the strategy is the firm's versus leadership's, I'm more apt to share my views, share my ideas, share the idea of the strategy with everyone in the firm. As you start to do that, you have more speakers, so to speak, in the organization sharing the good news, sharing the excitement. It builds up that excitement. So communicate. So that's one is getting more thoughts in the room, having more folks feel as if the strategy is theirs, because that increases the communication. The other piece, which is a best practice, is our town halls. And the firms we work with on strategy that have done very well with their strategy have been very intentional about having, whether it be quarterly or semi-annual town halls, to do two things. One of which is to share their progress on the strategy and share where the strategy is and where they are and what's upcoming. But I think a more important part of that is sharing the accomplishments and sharing appreciation for the hard work folks have done. because you start that positive momentum. And once you have the positive momentum very early on in the strategy, that builds an unbelievable positive force, a tailwind, shall we say, from behind you to move you forward, to get things going. So those are two things. It's the communication, getting more voices in, so you have more folks talking about it, and being very intentional about things like town halls where you're sharing ideas and sharing the progress.
Let's turn our attention to Liz now. Liz, you've measured hundreds of firm cultures. What differentiates those with the best results?
Yeah, after looking at hundreds of firms, one of the things that really differentiates strong cultures are the alignment of values, meaning the values and behaviors that people experience in the organization currently are also the ones they want in the future. So your current state and your future state look very similar. Going along with those values and behaviors, most of the firms that have the best results have very little sludge in their organization. Sludge is defined as those behaviors and factors that bring down high-performing teams, like gossip, entitlement, bureaucracy. Organizations who don't have a lot of those negative behaviors in their cultures do better, and they keep that to a minimum. No organization has zero sludge, but the best organizations make sure that the sludge is not overtaking and is at a minimum.
Great.
Two other factors that we measure at Focus separate the best firms. One is that they're high in ownership mentality, and the other is that employees feel like they're playing for a winner. Both of these factors tend to be significantly higher in firms that have stronger cultures.
That's terrific. So when we think about measuring our culture, right? So I'm an owner of a firm, or I'm a founder or leader of a firm, and I really want to think about this. What advice would you give me? What are three important considerations that you would tell me if I'm thinking about measuring my culture?
Yeah, the first important consideration is how you will get good data. So good data in is good data out. And so it's vital to provide people with an anonymous way of giving feedback to their organization. I don't care how open an organization thinks they are or how much they ask for feedback. It is hard to give your organization and your leaders candid feedback. So a big part of our process at Focus when we survey organizations is to ensure the anonymity. And because of that, we get an average of 90% participation in our surveys, and we get candid, solution-oriented feedback. Second consideration is how to look at the data. So what we know about culture is that every organization has a macro culture, so an overarching culture for the entire organization, but they also have micro cultures, by team or tenure or your role. So understanding the differences that exist between groups is very important to understanding culture at an organization. It's important to know what values and behaviors are important to the different groups and honor those as long as they are not in conflict with the macro organization. The third consideration are the questions. And I could say a lot about the questions. We've, been doing this for 20 years, measuring culture. And so we know the important questions. But what I will say is that one of the things I think we do that is unique is that we look at not just the current state of the organization, but the future state of the organization. So when you do strategy work, you don't just consider the here and now, you consider the future. And the same is true for culture. You need to have a good picture of reality, what is true now, but you need to know how far you are from that desired future state as well.
Great. That's great advice. And, Liz, tell us a little bit about the approach to measuring the firm's effectiveness. So we measure more than culture, right? It's the overall firm effectiveness and the impact to their most important asset, their talent.
Brian's right. In an industry that is always focused on data, many organizations are leaving your biggest asset, which is your talent decisions, up to chance. And why do they do that? So a couple of reasons that we have seen in our experience and what we've heard. The first is that people are trusting their gut. traditionally decision-making in organizations has been about experience and has been about instinct. And that is actually one of the primary reasons that most small businesses and startups fail, is because people are relying solely on their experience and their gut and what has gotten them usually very successful up to that point. But research tells us that if you actually combine both data and your instinct, so we're not dismissing instinct by any means, but if you combine it, you're actually 19 times more likely to be profitable. Why? Because the world is changing and the world is constantly changing, and our customers change and our clients change, and we don't typically change. So one of the ways to get around those biases is to be able to also get data, which is unbiased information. Many of you know who Daniel Kahneman is, Nobel Prize winner, right? And he basically says and claims that using data to make decisions is absolutely critically important, because our propensity is to make, poor ones if we don't use data. The second reason that people tend not to use data and leave your talent decisions up to chance is because of what is called fact versus story. Many of you at Focus know that we talk a lot about what is fact and what is story, story being your own opinions, right? Instead of basing your decisions on fact, it's the opinions and stories, not just your own, but other people's in the organization. What you're hearing in the organization, right, are your stories, and people make decisions based on those. What's the problem with that? Well, the problem is that typically you're only hearing the loudest voices, right? So when you hear the loudest voices, what are you getting? Only a small amount of a tremendous amount of data. So you're missing so much information, and yet you are making decisions based upon this skewed data. So we say you got to go ahead and start measuring what traditionally has been unmeasurable. The first one that we talk about is organizational health. What is organizational health? Well, a lot of people know Focus is started with culture, right? Well, we know in the last, more than 20 years we've been around, that it is more than just culture, it's organizational health. That a big part of that is culture. And so we have a tool that actually measures your organizational health. This makes you absolutely have an organization by design, not default, right? So you're thoughtful and you're planning, and this is the way that you get there. It's kind of what we call, and our partner calls, the answers to the test. What do you need to focus on? What do you need to do? What are your strengths? What are your gaps in your organization that need to be addressed? And this provides you with that opportunity. So you really want to look at those things. So what you see here is actually what we measure on our organizational health survey. We look at these different building blocks of organizational health. And yes, it might look familiar because Maslow has talked about, building blocks of people and of families and all that good stuff. It also applies to organizations. So we look at the bottom rung, which is safety and security. What are those things that matter to people to make them feel safe and secure in their organization, right? We break down questions that look at this particular area, such as diversity. Do we have a diverse organization? Is our organization supportive of diverse environments or inclusive environments? Am I feeling safe to ask questions? Do I feel safe in my job? That has never been more tested in those last couple of years, that people have felt that lack of safety. And we know that in organizations, in order for you to be successful, people have to feel safe and secure. Once they feel that, we look at belonging and connection. Do you feel people connected to a team, right? Connected to each other? Again, one of those areas that people have felt really needing, even our introverts, feeling that connection has been so important. Knowledge workers. We're all knowledge workers. You're in the knowledge industry. and people want to get better and better and better. So we look at how do organizations do, making it an environment that is all about people getting better at their craft. And what you see to the side are some of those questions and how we break it out to see how your organization is doing on mastery and development. And then finally, that top rung of purpose and meaning. We know now, and all the research shows, people want to feel connected to something bigger than themselves and bigger than their day-to-day. How is the organization doing to connect their people to things that are bigger than themselves so that they know that what they do actually matters to the big scope of things? We also look at values, right? Those types of values and behaviors that are guiding the organization, because that's part of your culture. Those things that you have currently in your organization, those values and behaviors, as well as the ones you want in the future. Because it's really important that people understand culture, organizational health is not a project. It is ongoing. And so you have to know what people are looking at in the future as well as your organization changes and the world around us changes. We look at those things that are bringing you down. Are there behaviors in the organization that are slowing you down? We look at, people talk about engagement. We do look at engagement. We look at it from a couple of different points, but also from loyalty. How sticky are your people? Or are they actually calling recruiters or have one foot out the door? Important information. And then again, organizational health is about what we call success factors. How are you doing in communication, decision-making, collaboration? These are all measurable things that you need to know in order to have strong organizational health. The other thing we do in organizational health is we talk about strategy. Brian, what do we look at when we want to measure strategy in organizations?
Yeah, thanks, Liz. So you think of the organizational structure with culture being one pillar, strategy is the other. So we want to know a couple of things from a quantitative perspective. A, how well is the strategy understood generally? B, how well do I really understand it as applies to me? So do I know what it is? And then can I apply it to my day-to-day life? Do I understand how I'm helping to drive the success of the firm? And then another element is how well is it communicated? And that those three types of questions allow us to dig behind, well, if there are certain pieces of the data that we're finding, how do we help correct those?
Brian, in your comments, you mentioned strategy is another pillar of a strong organization. Can you tell me a little bit about your experience with strategy in the investment industry? For example, do firms do strategy very well?
Unfortunately, no. And my story is I think there are three reasons for doing that. The first of which is most of us, when we've experienced strategic planning, have experienced it in one of three ways. We've experienced it in the first way, which is we go through really what becomes a creative writing exercise. We put a lot of ideas on pieces of paper. Sometimes it looks like a book. We finalize it, quote unquote, finalize it, and then we don't do much with it after that. So there's no action that comes out of it. And the problem with doing the creative writing exercise is there's a lot of unattainable items in there that really become an issue for folks because it becomes a disincentive. They're not realistic items. So the first reason that, or at least the first experience on strategy is it's a creative writing exercise. Part of that, so item 2 that we often see, is you see strategies that are written and then go up on a shelf. True story, working with a CEO one time on a strategy assignment, one of the first questions I asked is, have you done strategic planning before? He said, yes. So I got very excited. He then goes and pulls a document off of his shelf, dusts it off, I kid you not, dusts it off and gives it to me. I said, this is it? He said, yep. Asked out of curiosity, what's the last time you looked at it? He asked me whatever the date was on that document. So the second experience we typically have is we just do stuff and put it away and don't think about it again. The third piece is we don't create strategic plans, we create strategic actions. So we do everything very short term. And we don't look at, it's just, plans should be done 3-5 years, more likely 3. But what we do is we do things in 6, 8, 12-week increments. And all of a sudden, when you put it all together, you realize you have pieces all over the place. So you don't feel much traction. So unfortunately, we don't do strategy very well as an industry. And it's because of typically one of those three reasons, because the experience we've had has been in one of those three buckets, and we don't want to recreate that.
So we talked about at the very beginning of our podcast, you talked about data, right? So that's something that's important. We're measuring culture, but we're measuring much more than culture. We're measuring organizational effectiveness. What would you say are two tips that you think are really important you can share with our audience about measuring their firm's effectiveness?
Yeah. So certainly, a little plug. I think our organizational health survey is fantastic because it gives you a real opportunity to look across the organization and get important data from those who are living the firm each and every day. The other piece I would say, and this has been helpful in strategy, is talking to the members of your team, going out as a leader and understanding where the pain points are, what's working and not working, getting a sense from them of what what they see as opportunities for the firm. And what I'm always impressed by, we do strategic planning. One of the ways we do it is we broaden the audience, as I referenced earlier. We promote having more voices in the room. And when we think about creating a strategy and creating pieces of the strategy for your stakeholders, having folks from each of your tribes, your investments team, your marketing team, marketing and sales, and operational teams is super important because they see the stakeholders from different angles. So you get this holistic view of what is right for us, what's right for us as the firm, what's right for us as employees, and what's right for us for our clients. So being able to have that broader view, the way folks experience the firm and experience your clients, is extremely important. So it's the actual empirical data of the numbers and probably more of the qualitative data, the conversations, putting those together, extremely powerful because it gives you a lot of ammunition to be able to craft a plan to understand the firm to move forward with a strong foundation.
Great. Well, thanks, Brian. Appreciate that. Let's turn our time over to Liz for a moment. Liz, in your comments, you mentioned development as an important factor for strong culture. What are the best firms doing out there to address this?
Well, the first thing they're doing is they're recognizing that development is important, and it's a key intrinsic motivator for recruiting and retaining top talent. So you gotta be aware in order to is the first step. The second step is defining development to fit the culture of the firm. So it's important to know what life stage you're at, what the culture is, what the size of the organization is, right? It's not a ladder climb anymore for most organizations that we work with. So they really have to redefine development and fit it into where they are at the current moment. The final thing I will say is that what separates an important factor for firms is that they're giving multiple ways for people to learn. So from self-guided programs to formal programs to individual development and group development to audio ways of learning, visual ways of learning, cross-collaboration projects, special projects, really giving people so many different ways to learn because we know that people learn in different ways. Different things resonate with different people. And the more opportunities you have and the different kinds of modalities that you have for learning will increase that chance for you to retain and recruit top talent with those types of development programs.
Yeah, that's so important. I like to refer to this as the return on time. What's the return your organization or the individuals are getting for the time they're spending in developing themselves? And that's really critical to making sure that you have strong employees going forward to propel your business into the future. So Liz, if you could give us two important tips about measuring firms' effectiveness, what would they be?
Yeah, the first goes back to what we talked about before, and that was giving people the ability to provide candid feedback by letting them give you anonymous and confidential feedback in whatever process you use. That is first and foremost an important tip I would give. The second one is don't think of culture as a project. Measurement should be a mindset. It's the way we do things around here. And so whether it's measuring your firm's overall effectiveness, measuring culture, measuring strategy, individual competency, doesn't matter. Measuring effectiveness in the soft stuff, which is measurable, needs to be seen in the same light as measuring investment performance. It is not a project.
Yeah, that's great. And I will say, it's so critical to not think of things like this as a project. This is the way you do business. And to your point, just like you measure investment results, you want to be measuring how effective you are as an organization at leveraging your talent. Well, thank you everybody for listening to this episode number 3, Measuring Your Culture, of the Investment Leaders Guidebook. For more information, please visit our website, www.focuscgroup.com, for all of the resources that we have and that we provide to our clients and our prospects and our friends.